the newsagents.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here in Israel at this important time. Above all, I'm here to express my solidarity with the Israeli people. You have suffered an unspeakable, horrific act of terrorism, and I want you to know that the United Kingdom and I stand with you. I'm looking forward to my meetings later today with the Prime Minister and President, and I very much hope that they will be productive meetings. Thank you again.
Another day, another world leader pitches up at Ben Gurion Airport to speak to Israeli leaders. Obviously this time Rishi Sunak, with the distressing accompaniment in the background of an air raid siren going off, presumably meaning incoming rockets from Gaza. But is this diplomatic manoeuvring going anywhere? There will be more world leaders who will converge on Jerusalem. But is this just a pause, or is it going to affect what Israel does next? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John, and on this episode we want to look at whether anything is really changing in the calculus of Israel about what it does next and whether to go into Gaza and with what force following the explosion at the hospital. We know that Joe Biden left having got an agreement with the Israelis and the Egyptians that the Rafah crossing should open. And as I speak to you now, the delivery of aid is still kind of on the border. It hasn't got across into Gaza to help the Palestinians who so desperately need water and fuel and medicines after the period of siege that has been taking place since the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel 11 days ago. Rishi Sunak is there, and he's going to be touring the region. And, you know, Britain aren't the biggest players in this, but we are a significant voice. And presumably it is good at least that talking is taking place, because we know that got cancelled yesterday following reports that the bombing of that hospital in Gaza was as a result of Israeli aircraft and maybe not, as it now seems clearer, the result of a misfiring Palestinian rocket. So what can we expect from the diplomacy that is coming up now? I've been speaking to Shashank Joshi. He is the defence editor of The Economist magazine, but a long-standing, really distinguished scholar and historian of military strategy. We've had the terrible incident of the hospital bombing, and I might come back to that. Do you think that's going to have any effect on the speed with which Israel launches a land incursion into Gaza? Indeed, will it launch its land incursion into Gaza?
I think it will. I think it's inevitable. If you talk to Israeli commanders, they talk about a ground invasion of Gaza in terms of when, not if. And Israel's political leadership, I don't think it could survive a climb down from a ground invasion at this stage. But the terrible attack on the hospital, or the accident of the hospital, we might say now, given the evidence, I think has complicated Israel's calculus. We've already seen that the episode has caused Arab states who rushed to judgment, I think very prematurely, to cancel their summit with President Biden in the last few days. And I think that the outrage we see, including that which may manifest tomorrow and Friday on the West Bank, where there's already a lot of unrest and hundreds of arrests just today, I think, that is going to stretch Israel's attention, stretch Israel's forces, and it will increase diplomatic opposition and Arab outrage in the face of a ground invasion more than would have even been the case previously. So I think this will cause them to hesitate, to be very cautious. But no, ultimately, I still think Israeli troops are going into Gaza.
And Shashank, the hospital explosion, whatever it was, there was an explosion.
Yes.
Terrible in terms of the death toll and appalling for all those Gazans who were caught up in it. But what happened around that, I thought was some kind of illustrative of the 24-hour news cycle, of the instant reaction and taking up of arms on social media, which, and I noticed that you yesterday, a very distinguished defence analyst, said, on the balance of what I've seen so far, this does look like it was a misfiring rocket from within Gaza.
Yes, that's right. I think what we saw was a rush to judgment based on limited evidence, and I understand Israel has been heavily bombing Gaza, so it isn't outlandish to suspect initially that a Israeli airstrike may have hit a hospital. We know Hamas uses hospitals as bases. We know that Israel has struck medical facilities in the past. We know that these things have happened. So it is not wrong to ask that question. But one has to be open to evidence as it comes in, and one has to be inherently skeptical of press releases from Hamas. You wouldn't take a press release from, the Taliban on the face value, and I'd be similarly cautious about taking Hamas on face value. And what we saw from the images, and then Israeli claims, and then more recently American intelligence based on satellites and voice intercepts, is that the balance of evidence does point to this. But I will say two things. One is it shows why news gathering, John, as you know very well, it's becoming really interestingly reliant on having the expertise to analyze those images. I don't have that expertise. I rely on talking to a range of experts who tell me, look, that crater isn't consistent with an Israeli bomb. It's more consistent with a Hamas failed rocket. And I talk to a range of them to triangulate. But secondly, if the King Hussein of Jordan is rushing to judgment on a cold evening and blaming Israel, it's difficult to expect ordinary people watching the news to be more discriminating. And I think Arab states, including those much closer to Israel, United Arab Emirates and others, their position, I think, poisoned the well slightly that evening when the first news came in.
And you yourself, when you tweeted what you tweeted yesterday, I would imagine you got considerable blowback because people wanted to believe what they wanted to believe and didn't want to be disabused of that.
Yeah, I think it's a sign, isn't it, of social media, as we've seen over the years. These people have always been there. They would once have written letters to you, John, wouldn't they, and sort of said crazy things in green ink. And those people now have access to you and me immediately, and to indeed anyone they wish to contact, and to spray out their thoughts. But it's not just that. I think it's quite serious, people. You will find someone on social media who will compound your priors if you're not open to the evidence. If you want to find some vague analyst who's saying, actually, I think it was, white phosphorus munition, and I've got some proof from Yemen. You'll find someone saying something that validates your view, and so there's still open source evidence isn't a free. It's a free for all, so it doesn't change the need for curation and judgment. And I think on top of that, it results in this sort of bilious, poisonous vitriol. Indeed, I think, John, you tweeted me yesterday and someone responded saying that they thought my name suggested I was Jewish. I was a secret Jew, to which I can only say I'm delighted to be welcome to the tribe. I'm very grateful. And if anyone has the phone number for the elders of Zion, please pass it on. I understand we all get a copy.
I mean, Shashank, I saw that and I thought, oh my God. So the only reason Shashank Joshi, who's spent his life as a serious journalist, is saying that is because he's a Jew, which he's not.
Well, but you know what? I think it is hard. It is hard in these environments to hold back from judgment. But I think it's important that we scrutinize the claims of all sides in this conflict. That does include Israel. I don't blame people saying Israel has in the past not been entirely straight with incidents. We saw the shooting of a Palestinian-American journalist not long ago, in which an Israeli investigation was really misleading at first, and then later acknowledged Israeli forces had been responsible. So, it is important. I saw the Israeli ambassador on both BBC and Sky a few days ago, and on both occasions, on the first occasion, she compared Israelis' actions to those of Dresden, which I thought was very unwise. And then on Sky, she denied there was a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which I think is appalling. So I'm really disappointed with the propensity of actors in this conflict, the states involved, to directly spread this kind of disinformation. This isn't a bottom-up phenomenon alone. We're seeing irresponsible acts by some of the most important officials who really ought to know better.
And we had Joe Biden in Israel yesterday talking about, it's his belief that it was not the Israelis, it was a Palestinian rocket, and that based on American intelligence. How seriously or how kind of credible should we take that?
I think that this raises a really important point, because when you read the words American intelligence, there's a section of people whose brains turn to mush, and they say, but Iraq, 2003, WMD, as if that sort of halts the conversation and is a QED, the American intelligence is always wrong. This is a catastrophic way of thinking about the world. And people who held that worldview, I will say, got it very wrong in January, February of 2022, when American and British intelligence said, Russia's going to invade Ukraine. We know that. And other people said, you're lying to us. You always lie to us. And people with that heuristic had egg on their face, because the lesson is that, yes, intelligence agencies get it wrong. And sometimes, yes, that intelligence is politicized when policy is at stake. And I don't blame people for being skeptical to a degree about US claims which affect their close ally Israel. But on balance, American intelligence knows an awful lot. In this case, they saw probably the rocket launches using the infrared sensors on their satellites, their SBIRS satellites, which collect the heat plumes of rocket launches. And they have incredible capabilities in the region because there's an aircraft carrier strike group in the coast of the Med flying back and forth, hoovering up every single radio wave and electronic emission that is coming out of Gaza. They are watching it like hawks. And I think if you assume everything US intelligence says is wrong, simply because they are, biased or ideological, I think you will end up making a lot of analytical mistakes along the way. And I've seen that so many times in recent months and years.
Shashank Joshi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks very much for having me again.
After the break, we'll be talking to the author, Michael Lewis, about his brilliant new book about Sam Bankman-Fried. Emily has been speaking to him about the rise and spectacular fall of a crypto billionaire.
Well, joining us now is Michael Lewis, writer, author. You might know him from Moneyball or The Big Short. His books have inspired these huge blockbuster Oscar-winning films. But we're going to be talking to him today about Sam Bankman-Fried because his latest book tries to help us get to know the guy that was at one point, Michael, I'm going to say, destined to be the world's first trillionaire and is now in jail, right?
Yep, now in jail and now on trial.
Right.
Yeah.
You met him a lot of times. I mean, you sound in the book like you love him.
Love is too strong. I like him. I liked him. I like him from the beginning. I like him now. He is, what I really liked was him as a character. I mean, the first thing that attracted me to him, I bumped into him accidentally. I didn't go looking to write a book about Sam Bankman-Fried. Someone asked me to meet him and evaluate him for them, and I didn't know who he was when that happened. But after a couple hours of hearing his story, I thought, this person represents a literary opportunity. He's gone from having no money to having $22 billion in the space of 18 months. The world is reshaping itself around his pile of money. And this phenomenon of someone being able to get that rich that fast is a very contemporary phenomenon. You don't find that happening 50 years ago.
Do you think you were taken in by him?
No, of course not. I mean, I don't write this book until January. I have all the information the world has when I write the book. I think I was able to understand him in some ways that the world has not bothered to understand it.
He's on trial for fraud?
Fraud, but it's fraud, but the actual charges are all kind of complicated. And they're complicated. This is something I didn't understand until recently, and a prosecutor explained it to me. He's charged by the federal government. And there's no federal theft statute. So you get charged with things like wire fraud, and it's using the communication systems to enable a fraud. So they're 5 or 6 money laundering. I mean, what he's really charged all comes back to one thing, and it's taking the deposits of his customers on his crypto exchange and moving them in billions of dollars onto his own private hedge fund.
So this is just now starting to ring bells for you. He's the FTX guy. He's the guy that went bankrupt last November, and then this huge sort of extraordinary story of the billions that he was making seemed to collapse, and he's now, as we said, languishing in jail. We'll come on to the kind of end of the story at the end, yeah. Michael. But you spent a lot of time with him. Do you get Sam?
I do think I eventually get him. He wasn't like anybody I'd ever known, so it took me a while to get him. But there was a collection of features that was just, but in the very beginning, just interesting. Like, for example, he seemingly born unendowed with natural human feeling. That he says he never felt really love, he's never felt pride, he doesn't feel empathy. Very open about it. Like, I just can't feel what you feel. It's almost like a color blindness.
You say he doesn't feel pleasure either.
Doesn't feel pleasure. You're right.
That's almost impossible to get your head around.
It is hard to get your head around. He feels absolutely numb, for example, to any sort of art or nature. Totally denatured. And his way of moving through life is math. It's sort of like calculating, making judgments, trying to quantify the world around him and responding to those numbers. And I never really seen that to that extreme. Moneyball is like sort of that in sports, like using numbers as opposed to everything else, all the other information you're getting to evaluate an athlete, and actually has some value, and it does get you to different places. Sam was doing it in his life, like making a decision based on numbers about whether to have children or get married or this or that or be your friend.
And he had a really odd childhood. I mean, in a way, he was a very normal childhood, but I love this line. He was totally freaked by finding out that kids believed in Santa Claus or adults believed in God. He was just like, why are you so stupid?
So it tells you something about how isolated he was and how odd his parents were in the way they raised him. That he has to, that he's 10 years old before he realizes that people actually believe in God. But when he's 8 years old, some kids in school are talking about Santa's about to come, and he says, "What do you mean Santa's about to come?" He'd heard about Santa Claus, but he thought of it as almost a TV character, like a cartoon character. He thought it was like Bugs Bunny. And when he starts to talk to these kids, he realizes they really believe this story about the elves and the chimney and the sleigh, all that. And he actually is disturbed. He goes and thinks about it. What does it mean that human beings actually believe this? And he comes away with the view that, well, what I've just learned is a property of human beings is that they're capable of mass delusion. And this is one of many examples of Sam Bankman-Fried sort of decoding other people the way like a Martian might. That is like how people work. Another example.
And mass delusion, I guess, is really important in telling the story of what
crypto.
He does next, right? Yeah.
But he's sort of like, it's of a piece with lots of the rest of him. The fact that he doesn't make facial expressions, doesn't know how to make. So when you say something amusing, he internalizes it as amusing, but his face doesn't smile. And it's not until he realizes some ambition in the world and he's older that he actually gets out a mirror and starts to try to manufacture facial expressions so other people can read him better.
I mean, people would say sort of slightly glibly or trying to find an identity, this is spectrumy, right?
Yeah, people would say autism, right? And I never do. These words are boxes. You kind of put a word on people and then everybody says, oh, that's that. And I always felt with him that there was no box that fully contained him. For example, when you hear, I don't know, autism or spectrumy, you don't think, oh, that person's really good at reading other people. Right. And he was really good at reading other people, like very astute about like who that person was and why.
So one of his kind of evangelisms, if you like, I mean, he doesn't believe in God, he doesn't believe in Santa Claus, but he does believe in this really extraordinary kind of concept of effective altruism. You call it EA.
Yeah.
Just talk us through that.
What it is?
I mean, to Précy, he believes it's worth making huge quantities of money because you solve the world's problems like that more effectively.
This is, I think, a single example in all of my work of you people doing weird things to us, you English people, that this comes out of England. Normally it's Americans dreaming up kooky things and inflicting it upon the British. This is some Oxford philosophers who extend essentially utilitarianism into the world in a practical way. They say, all right, if at little cost to myself, I can take a little bit of my salary, and this is how it starts, and effectively give it away in Africa so it saves a life. This isn't just like a nice thing to do, it's a duty. And there's a philosopher at Oxford who writes a paper estimating what the consequences of his taking half his salary for the rest of his life and giving it away effectively. And he calculates that, for example, he can prevent blindness in 80,000 children in Africa.
So you're better off being a banker that makes or a financier that makes a lot of money.
So
rather
this
than
is then they extend it. It takes a bit, but the philosophy that Sam Bankman-Fried collides with when he's in university is if you're thinking about how to maximize the lives you save, if that's kind of what the goal is, we're going to turn your life purpose into a math problem. And you have a choice of, for example, going and being a doctor in Africa and saving lives there. Or if you're really good at finance, you go onto Wall Street and you make millions of dollars. You pay 20 doctors to go to Africa. Which do you do? And the argument is, well, the math says you go become a Wall Street person.
It's the Bill Gates model, basically. Solve malaria after you've done Microsoft.
Yes, but Bill Gates didn't create Microsoft to solve malaria. He didn't make money in order to give it away. He's given it away. Now this is a peculiar thing. And if anybody who's written about Wall Street is kind of near Wall Street, would have been struck around 2013, 14 by these reports of kids who were coming out of Princeton, Harvard, Yale, MIT, who were going to work on Wall Street explicitly to give all the money away and living very modest lives. And that's not what people have gone to Wall Street for historically. They've gone to Wall Street to make the money and keep it, or give it away to their universities to have a building named after themselves. It's a movement that actually became kind of noticeable, and Sam Bankman-Fried was in the early days of it.
So how did he go then from being this kid who actually wants to save the world or do good or become this, mega philanthropist, to a guy who's in jail for fraud?
It's not that complicated. The goals never changed. So the other thing you need to know about the movement, I think, is actually kind of critical to understanding his development, is the movement goes from, let's save living children in Africa, to, if you do the math, and you're trying to maximize the number of lives you save, what you really need to do is look at catastrophic risk to humanity, things that might wipe out all human beings, asteroid strikes or artificial intelligence or a really bad pandemic. And if you accept that that's even possible, or climate change, that all people could be wiped out, then all people will be wiped out for all time, and you can slightly reduce the risk of that happening, the expected number of lives you save is much greater if you attack those problems than if you attack living problems. And so this movement jumps the shark, and Sam jumps the shark with it, and they're suddenly looking at how do you build a pandemic prevention system around the world so that next really deadly thing doesn't happen. And that requires not millions of dollars, that requires hundreds of unlimited sums of infinite money.
$1 trillion.
So all of a sudden the financial ambitions start to get very, very outlandish. So if you tell, one of the ways I thought of Sam Bankman-Fried is like one dystopic version of artificial intelligence. If you tell an AI, and this is one of the dystopic things, if you tell an AI program to do something, but don't tell it how to do it or what it can't do in doing it, you can get some perverse results. Say you say, get me a reservation at my favorite restaurant. You don't tell it anything else. It finds your favorite restaurant that evening is fully booked, and it just starts killing off the people who have reservations to get you a table. Right. This is Sam Bankman-Fried. So it is. That's how it's sort of like, okay, that's the goal, and we're not going to put any guardrails on how this goal is accomplished. Now you also have to keep in mind he's doing this in crypto land. This is not like. He's not doing this in the city of London at a regulated bank. These crypto land is the Wild West. I'm not totally sure that a lot of other crypto exchanges aren't structured much the way FTX was. And in fact, if you talk, especially the Asian ones, if you talk to the Chinese employees, when they see what happens, that he's moved all the customer deposits into his private hedge fund, they weren't shocked he did it, or even surprised that he'd used some customer money. They were just surprised by how much, because they had come from other exchanges where they'd seen similar sort of stuff.
This suggests there are more Sam Bankman-Frieds
yes.
out there.
Oh, well, the question is, are they within the reach of the American legal system? I mean, what's odd about this is he's been pulled into the United States and tried in the United States. He was mainly an offshore business, but he is American, and he was in the Bahamas, and he did have a U.S. subsidiary. But they're exchanges whose names you've never heard of, who are in China or in Hong Kong or nowhere, or stateless, that the U.S. just can't reach.
But just to go back to this, I mean, how does a man who wants to be an effective altruist
yes.
get accused of fraud? I mean, you think he could go down for this, right?
Well, your problem is you're thinking effective altruist just means simple good
being
person.
Nice, right?
Yeah, being nice. That's not what that means. It means.
So it goes back to your restaurant. If I need to kill everyone in the restaurant to get my reservation.
Yeah, it's sort of, or another way of thinking about it if you're doing the cost-benefit analysis properly, the ends can justify the means.
Okay, so that's an interesting one, because at one point he tries to buy Donald Trump out of the presidency to save democracy, right?
So this is a wrinkle that Sam Bankman-Fried adds to effective altruism. The effective altruists became kind of otherworldly. They're dealing with not like living problems, but I guess they're living problems, but they're thinking about, saving the life of humans a million years from now living on Mars. They aren't thinking, they're kind of detached from reality. And Sam takes the view, like, all these problems we're trying to solve are not going to be solved if there isn't a functioning democracy, especially in the United States. This is the mechanism for solving the problems. And Donald Trump is an existential threat to the democracy. So we have to find a way to prevent him from being president again. And they cook up this idea of paying Donald Trump not to run for president. Now, how far they got with it is still unclear. When I was talking to him about it, they weren't sure it was legal. Like, you could actually...
Well, it's deeply anti-democratic.
Well, it looks like a bribe.
Right.
Right? It's like but also, I put this to him and he didn't have a good answer. All right, how enforceable is it? If you give Donald Trump $5 billion, and that was the number...
He runs anyway.
Yeah, he's going to run anyway. He's going to take the money and run. That's what he does. And so I just thought it was cuckoo, but it was a funny, very Sam Bankman-Fried approach to the problem. It's like, you've got billions and we got this problem. Maybe you can just be paid not to do it. But they did. What was clear, they clearly had a line into the Trump operation, because you could see things they were planting in the Trump operation actually happening in Trump world. So that part of it was it was a real conversation. How much Donald Trump was actually part of that conversation, I don't know, but his people were.
Do you feel sorry for any of Sam Bankman-Fried's victims here, the people who lost money?
Well, I'm a customer. I had money on the U.S.
You probably
exchange.
made it back on your book now.
Yes, I do. I think, though, that there's an important fact that is going to have trouble getting itself into the courtroom, and but is useful if you're trying to evaluate this from outside. The bankruptcy people have counted up the $8.6 billion of funds that are missing, or that are lost, seemingly lost. But they've also, in June, announced they found $7.3 billion of the $8.6 billion. So whatever, 7/8 of the money. And it wasn't that they went and kind of clawed it back from people Sam had given it to. It was that it was in weird accounts in crypto land. So in addition to that, this is where it gets really odd. Sam invested some of this money in 200 different venture capital investments, like startup companies. One of his investments was a $500 million investment in an AI company called Anthropic, which, when the bankruptcy people get this stuff, a year ago, they think, oh, this is like an example of Sam Bankman-Fried's insanity. He gave $500 million to this startup, and it doesn't have anything but an idea. This company has just been valued by Amazon, who's investing in it, at $30 billion. And so Sam's, all right, I don't know what else is. I do know what else. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in that pile of venture capital investments that's valuable, but it's an example of that stake alone, together with what they found, will pay everybody off. So it's really not unlikely that you're going to be sitting here 2 years from now and Sam Bankman-Fried will be in jail for life, and the customers who you feel sorry for are going to get their money back.
So you think he could be jailed for life?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, yes. So here's your legal system. Your experience with your legal system does not prepare you for what he's on the other end of in our legal system. When the federal government, last year, the federal government in the United States charged 77,000 people with crimes. Maybe you probably read this in the book, so I'm asking you a question you probably know the answer to, but in case you missed it, if you had to guess what percentage of those people actually get off, what would you guess? You'd probably guess like 10%, 15%, less than half of 1%. So just for starters, just to be on the receiving end of federal charges, more than 99.5% of the people either plead guilty, or if they get to court, are convicted. So already his goose is cooked. And then he's got 3 of his colleagues very persuasively testifying that he knew about the money being in the wrong place, at least as of June.
Do you feel sorry for him? Do you worry about him in prison?
I actually, and this is, his psychiatrist would agree with me on this. Sam Bankman-Fried would rather be in prison with internet access than in a $30 million condo without it. That it isn't the prison. The way he lives his life, the prison's not going to bother him all that much. It's going to be being cut off from information and the rapid kind of distraction that the internet provides. I think if they cut him off from that, it's like torture to him.
Do you think he has a kind of God complex?
I think he developed it. I don't think he had it. I don't think he had it when he was a kid. He certainly didn't have it like when he was in college. What happened was something developed, and the way it developed is interesting. Effective altruism is part of it, right? Because what is effective altruism? That's kind of a God. We're going to save humanity, right? It's we're going to save humanity from existential risk. So it isn't just Sam. The movement has this kind of flavor to it, that we are superior beings who are going to save this species. And he was the face of the movement. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is Sam Bankman-Fried didn't think he had anything special about himself. He knew he was bright, right? I mean, he knew he was going to go to a good college, and he was the best math student in his high school class, best student in his high school class. But he didn't have a sense that he was really special until he collides with Wall Street. And when he gets to, like, what his mind does, that is, he thinks he can do better than almost anybody else, isn't revealed until he gets to Wall Street. And it's not Wall Street generally. It's specifically this modern incarnation, high frequency trading. These firms, which many people have never even heard of, they actually now sit in the center of all financial markets. They're the price setters of every financial commodity and security. And their names are Citadel and Virtu and Jane Street and Jump Trading. It's not Citigroup or JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or any of those.
They're the young Turks, the new guys.
The new guys are actually, and the money they're making puts the money that was made by previous generations to shame. I mean, it's like, single traders making $100 million a year. People who own the firms worth $10 billion. That kind of money. And they're looking for a kind of person that they didn't used to look for. There's like no social filter. It's purely an intellectual filter. And it's a mathy person. These people coming out of math and physics departments at MIT or Harvard, and when they find Sam, they subject him to a battery of tests, like they subject all of the applicants to, and the kind of tests, they're really weird tests.
It's kind of a mixture of the way you describe it. It's sort of gambling and decision making.
It's gambling and decision making, but it's very weird gambling and decision making. It's just gambling and decision making where there's often not a perfect answer. There's just a better answer. And Sam would say that, to put it in more simple terms, that if you play Sam in chess, or you put Sam in a chess tournament, he's good enough at chess. He's good. But he's not good like a chess champion. But if you change the game, and you have to make a move every 5 seconds, and you change the rules every 2 minutes so that queens are pawns or rooks or knights, and so that it's unstable. So it's not totally chaotic. Your brain can help you. It just can't get you to the perfect answer. That's like the financial markets are now, and the way people are in financial markets. And when Sam discovers he has this, he thinks he's really special, and this has a knock-on effect. So it speaks to the God complex. It's like you couple that with the EA stuff, and then you give him the capacity to create these chaotic environments in which he excels. So you look at FTX and Alameda, he just tried to create an environment that was as unstable as a chess match where you have to make decisions every 5 seconds and the rules change all the time. And everybody in the place is unhappy. Yeah. But he thinks that's what he's good at, and so he creates the environment he's good at.
Let me talk more broadly about the world that you kind of once inhabited and now you write. Big finance. The Big Short. I'm going to play you a clip you'll know very well from the end. This is Steve Carell's character.
I have a feeling that in a few years, people are going to be doing what they always do when the economy tanks. They will be blaming immigrants and poor people.
But Mark was wrong. In the years that followed, Congress had no choice but to break up the big banks and regulate the mortgage and derivatives industries.
So I guess you had some hindsight, which was, the film was made, 6 or 7 years after the financial crash.
Yep.
But it was made just at the point where Donald Trump was coming into power or was in power, right? That whole line about blaming immigrants and poor people, I wonder where you think we are now, because the financial markets are still doing what they do. People are still finding ways to make money. The poor are still getting blamed. The populace is still rising.
Yep.
You can be a sage about this stuff, but still not stop anything.
Right. It's combustible. It's combustible because it's the financial system is an extreme, at least in my country, I don't know about this country, is an extreme, or the industry is an extreme example of the industry having captured the regulatory process. That you can't actually fix the problems that are leading to people essentially assess excessive returns in finance. But it's a symptomatic of a broader problem. Like the gears of government are just grinding very, very poorly right now. And if you think about what one of the takeaways, my takeaways from the Sam Bankman-Fried story, and the Elon Musk story, and the Jeff Bezos story, but it's these, and the Mark Zuckerberg story. It's the relative power of individuals and institutions is way out of whack. And if people were looking to Sam as they were to like fix the world's problems, it was because they'd given up on the existing institutions as a way to fix the world's problems. Like incredible frustration with, it's not just financial regulation, it's climate change. It's AI regulation now. It's just can.
But haven't people always been frustrated with institutions?
With the government?
Isn't that the point?
Yeah, people have always been frustrated, but I think, we know what they think. Their polls, the levels of trust in the United States government have collapsed over the last 30 years. So they're more frustrated now than they used to be. And it's palpable. You feel like it's just like we've gotten to the point where the government can't solve any problems.
You say the government. We've got two candidates potentially standing who I think the latest poll was 70% of the American electorate don't want to see stand for either party, Biden
Right.
or Trump.
Right. Well, there's an example. But it's worse than that. It almost at this point doesn't matter who the president is because of the poisonous relationship between the people and the government. The lack of trust, that collapse in trust. And it's interesting to me to see how in that vacuum, when there's a collapse in trust, people like Sam Bankman-Fried can walk in and in 18 months be the person people trust. there's the one kind of grown-up who was in his operation, who was kind of crying after it all went bad, said something. She said, "I wanted there to be a Sam, and I wanted there to be someone who would stand up and kind of do these things that we expect our government to do." And I could tell you, I promise you, that feeling was universal in that collection of people around Sam Bankman-Fried, the famous people, Tom Brady, or.
Well, I remember when people were talking about would Mark Zuckerberg run for the presidency.
Right.
A million years ago, before Facebook.
Can you imagine? Mark Zuckerberg, if he was sitting here, he couldn't carry on a conversation with you. And Sam Bankman-Fried apparently entertained some thoughts that maybe he would do that. Again, like if people...
He'd stand for the presidency.
Yeah. You just came out in the trial yesterday that he said... He told his girlfriend, this is all pillow talk, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, but that he thought he had a 5% chance of becoming president, which is very Sam, like adding a probability to it. But if Sam has a 5% chance of being president, I have a 20% chance of becoming president. Like he just has no social ability, and it's a byproduct of this collapse in trust in our government.
And a byproduct of cryptocurrency, which was always meant to be the answer to bad government, is now, we know, being used by Hamas to fund terrorism, right? To raise millions. This was the Wall Street Journal reporting yesterday. Yep. You raise millions in crypto, and the next thing you know, you're creating a massacre.
That's right. The story of crypto has some strains to it that are really, really disturbing, but also just kind of interesting. That this currency, it's dreamed up in 2008 by someone who's still anonymous, but who calls himself Satoshi Nakamoto, who says when he dreams it up that he's creating this thing that can function as a currency that doesn't require banks or governments as in any kind of intermediary. So you and I can just have our own financial system between the two of us without going through a bank and or needing a government currency. And he's doing this, he says, because you can no longer trust these institutions. So the whole point of it is to get around your mistrust of the existing institutions. and not need institutions. And what the crypto world goes and does is rebuild all these institutions just in worse form. They build exchanges. You're not even supposed to need a crypto exchange. They build brokerage houses. They have banks. The problem is they're all unregulated, and it's all could kind of be done in secret, and there's no deposit insurance, all the things that sort of like make you a little more safe in the financial system and leave you less needing to trust in the goodness of your fellow man, that they never institute.
So the moral of the story could be we should all run headlong towards regulation and regulators and say, thank God they're here.
Oh, we should empower them. Yeah, I think this is right. It's the problem, the problem with an unempowered regulator or a semi-empowered regulator like the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States is it's not that they do nothing. It's that they do the wrong things because they can't actually tackle really powerful interests. If they were empowered to tackle powerful interests, we'd all be better off. And probably happier with them because they wouldn't do stupid things. They do fewer stupid things. I mean, it's true that regulation can be bad. It can create perverse incentives. It can create inefficiencies, all the rest. But you really don't have a functioning society without it. And and crypto is, basically unregulated space. It's unregulated, but it's a space where occasionally people get punished. So they live in this world that they think they can do anything, and then every now and then a hammer comes down on one of them, and that's what's just happened with Sam Bankman-Fried.
Michael Lewis, just brilliant to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks for reading it.
Before we go, there'll be full coverage tomorrow of the by-elections in mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth, and obviously the latest from the Middle East. I keep looking round, expecting the door to open at any moment to the studio and Lewis to walk in because there's been some new delay to his honeymoon. But remarkably, it looks like he's actually going on his honeymoon. Who would have thought it? Before I go, just to tell you what happened on my journey home last night from recording The Newsagents. I was at Leicester Square Tube Station, and this woman smiles very warmly at me and goes, "Oh, it's you, isn't it?" She was Scottish, even though you might not have been able to tell from the appalling accent. And I smile, and I kind of feel smug and self-important, and kind of, a beatific smile comes over my face. And she goes, she's with a bunch of students. She turns to the students and says, "Oh, look, it's that bloke from Coronation Street." It was a bloke from Coronation Street. It was the person sitting next to me. She didn't have a bloody clue who I was. I was an absolute nobody. And the guy from Coronation Street stands up, poses for selfies with this bunch of students, and I sat there feeling a right Charlie. We'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.